Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a book review on Grant Cardone's The 10X Rule. If you don't know who Grant Cardone is, you are living under a rock. He is a entrepreneur and a real estate mogul and a social media influencer. He's kind of a world personality, a global personality, and he has authored a number of books. And I recently picked up The 10X Rule because I have been working in 2025 to get my real estate license transferred from Oklahoma to Virginia. And during that time, I've been reading a lot of real estate books and business books and I guess kind of personal growth and self-development, because the 10X Rule is probably more of a business book than anything, but I think it's something that applies to all aspects of life. And so I wanted to do a book review talking about the book. First of all, I'm going to start by giving this book a rating on 5 stars. I give it a 3.5 stars. The book itself is a 3.5 stars. However, if you listen to the audio book, I will give it a 5 stars because it is a little bit more than just the book. It's Grant Cardone reading the book, but he also adds, sort of more words and more stories and more than just the text, and really contextualizes a lot of what he's talking about here. And it's kind of like listening to a podcast when you get the audiobook, but I highly recommend getting the audiobook for anyone who's in sales or anyone who's just looking to grow as an entrepreneur, because you can just listen to it while on your car ride, at the gym, and it's a great listen. I want to talk to you guys about some of the main takeaways I had from the book and sort of his thesis or about the book, right? And so this idea of the 10X rule kind of has 2 different elements to it, in my opinion. There's one element about the amount of action you should be taking, and then there's another element about how you should set your goals. And starting with the second element, you could probably guess from the title of the book that you should be 10xing your goals, right? And so he talks about mediocre being unacceptable, right? And people who have average marriages or average business returns or an average body, right? Like nothing that is average is good. And so if you set your goals and you make them too small, you don't force yourself to think massively, think big, and to build something that really could be transformative. And what happens whenever let's say for me, being a new licensed real estate agent, my goal for the year was 10 home sales for the year 2025. But now, since reading this book, I have decided to 10x that. So my new goal is 100 sales. And do I think this is achievable? It probably is. It might be. But regardless if it is, if I hit 10% of my new goal, I'll have met my original goal. And what it does is it forces you to behave with more urgency, to prioritize speed, to think big. And so the 4 types of action that Grant talks about are the do nothings, that's level 1 of action, the retreaters, and those are people who take actions in reverse. And then the 3rd degree is people who take normal amounts of action. And then the 4th degree of action is the type that Grant suggests you take, which is massive action, right? And he does a good job of showing you how massive action is actually the natural state of humans. He draws this analogy to a child, and he does a pretty good job of showing you that, like, children by nature take massive amounts of action, but through society and through our upbringing and through our formal education and our peer groups, right, we are taught to reduce the amount of action that we take. And so there's an element to it that kind of reminds me of Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, which is a book review I'll have coming because it's a book I was reading at the same time I've been reading this. In terms of having a childlike nature to the world, right? And not a sense of being immature, but in the sense of thinking big and always be acting and to see the world from a new set of eyes, right? So I want to read to you guys about action and what he says about taking massive action means making somewhat unreasonable choices and then following these up with even more action. This level of action will be considered by some to be borderline insane, well beyond the agreed upon social norm, and will always create new problems. You can also expect to be criticized and labeled by others when you start taking massive action. The second you start hitting it big, you will immediately be judged by the mediocre. I, I would say that some of the biggest takeaways from this book for me were thoughts about being omnipresent and being willing to take criticism, and being obsessed with whatever it is you're doing. We'll soon talk about some of those other points that I just talked about in terms of making excuses and being criticized, right? Because even in my own life, like doing this YouTube channel and being in the Marine Corps, when I was in law school, like all throughout my time, even when I was an undergrad and I had a YouTube channel, like people will try to criticize you, right? But you just keep going. Here we are, almost 250 videos later, and eventually, as Grant eloquently writes, some of this hate will turn to praise, and we'll get to that. But so, talking about obsession, what if the world saw a person's unwavering passion, undying obsession, and a bonfire-like desire to see through his or her goals as gifts rather than as defects or disease? Wouldn't we all accomplish more? Why do people have to turn a passion for excellence and obsession to succeed into something negative? What if the only thing standing in the way of your greatness was that you just had to go after everything obsessively, persistently, as though your life depended on it? Well, it does. Remember as well that making the goal too small won't allow you to gather the right fuel or take the right amount of action to break through the resistance, competition, and changing conditions. So I that section spoke to me because I'm someone who's always been a big thinker, a big dreamer. I'm not going to necessarily share my goals on this video, but they're quite large, and so just the idea of obsessively going towards those goals, and as we talked about. So this idea of being omnipresent, like Grant talks about how in his own business, he at some point decided, I can't remember exactly what his goal was, but it was something along the lines of he was going to be the number one name that came to mind when people thought of sales training. And he started putting out a lot of content and started posting it, 15 times a day on Twitter, 20 times a day on Facebook, a bunch of times on YouTube. And during this time, he got some like backlash, but he just kept going. And I think that that's a truth that like you have to accept if you're going to be someone who wants to dream big and be everywhere and be on all platforms and consistently be putting out content, right? So there were two last things I wanted to talk about, which was fear and criticism. So Grant talks about fear as being a driving force. Like when he senses fear, he knows that this means that he is doing something right. He knows that he needs to run towards fear instead of away from it, because it is in the things that you fear that your greatness and the ability to achieve great success lies. And so I was thinking about this when I was driving in terms of I will be very fearful the first time I go to a home sales presentation because I have never done one. I have been a selling agent in one transaction back in Oklahoma, but it was a selling that kind of fell into my lap, so I didn't have to compete for it. And so I started thinking like the more I put myself in situations that I'm fearful of, whether that be door knocking or whether that be making videos or talking to strangers about real estate that you just meet out in public in the wild, doing these things that you fear is a sign that you are on the right track. And so what Grant says is fear is one of the most disabling emotions a human being can experience. It immobilizes people, and often it ultimately prevents them from going for their goals and dreams. Everyone fears something in life. However, it's what we each do with that fear that distinguishes us from others. Eat your fears. Don't feed them by backing off or giving them time to grow. Every successful person I know of has used fear as an indicator to determine which actions will provide the greatest return. I use it in my own life every chance I get to remain aware that I'm growing and expanding myself. So whatever that thing is that you may fear, whether that be joining the Marine Corps or starting a business or going to the gym or, reading Ayn Rand's, an Ayn Rand novel because they're 900 pages, right? Like whatever it is you fear, that's the thing you need to run towards. And that was a big takeaway for me. So talking about criticism, right? And this was one of my favorite parts of the book. And I'll probably end it after this because it's already getting quite long. However, there's no way to achieve serious levels of success without getting some attention. Yes, people will eye you and make it clear that they disapprove of what you're doing. When you start taking enough action, it won't be long before you're judged by people who aren't taking any. Some will admire you, some will want to learn from you, but unfortunately, most will envy you. The only way to handle criticism is to foresee it as an element of your success formula. Much like fear, it's a sign that you are making the right moves in the right volumes, getting enough attention, and making enough of a splash. I think that's a powerful message to end on because, so many of us are immobilized by judgment and fear of not just failure, but gossip, what things and people will say about you. And so you have to understand that that is a part of success. Like, people are going to talk because when you're doing things that they're not, it makes them feel insecure. It makes them aware of their own inaction. And ultimately, it's something that you have to fully embrace. There is one quote, and I couldn't find it because, I mostly listen to this in the audio format, but he was talking, it might not be in the book. It might just be in the audio format, but he was talking about sort of the different names that you will get called in the process to being recognized as someone who is great. And so hope this message was useful to some people. Mostly make these videos just to have intellectual conversation with you guys. I am an avid reader. I like discussing books, but also I like to be able to go back and sort of look at my thinking and evolution because I think that continuing to grow is extremely important. It's one of the 30 keys to success that Grant talks about, which is, continual learning. And so thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.